One side calls it the Fair Share Amendment, the other the Millionaire's Tax or the Tax Hike Amendment, and on your ballots next month it'll be called Question 1. Whatever you call it, there's been a lot of disagreement on what kind of effect it would have on our state. But before we get into the debate, let's lay out the facts. A yes vote would, according to the Secretary of State's information for voters, quote, amend the state constitution to impose an additional 4% tax on that portion of incomes over $1 million to be used, subject to appropriation by the state legislature, on education and transportation. A no vote, of course, would keep things just as they are. Joined now by Cence for the Coalition to Stop the Tax Hike Amendment. That's obviously a no. Steve Crawford for the Fair Share Massachusetts campaign. It's obviously a yes. Dan, Steve, good to see you both. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Jim.
Why should people vote yes?
Because it'll make our tax system fairer and it'll provide more money for transportation and education. Right now, the wealthiest people in this state pay a smaller share in taxes than the rest of us. That's just not fair. To fix that, we need to amend the Constitution. And by amending the Constitution, we protect that money specifically for transportation and education.
Okay, so fairness, transportation, and education doesn't get much better than that, then,
all
does
noble
it?
endeavors.
So why
very
no?
Much so. Well, my counterpart here touched upon subject to appropriation as a point that you made there is a very, very important one.
What does that mean?
It means that the legislature, as John Adams wrote it in our Constitution hundreds of years ago, is the only group that can appropriate funds. So therefore, this money, yes, when raised, will go to transportation and education. It will not raise any funding towards education and transportation.
Why do you say it won't raise any?
It doesn't have to, subject to appropriation. So when the legislature, which sees fit every year, and they're very good at doing so, at understanding what the needs are for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, they allocate funds to where they're supposed to be going. Relative to education, we're 6th in the nation in funding for education. Relative to transportation, President Biden now has billions of dollars coming down in funding for transportation. So the legislature is going to spend where the greatest needs are. With this money coming in, it'll fund up to where they appropriate, and it'll be up to the discretion of the legislature.
Would you support the question if there wasn't any discretion, as you say there is? We'll get his response. Would you support it?
I didn't bring the question forward, Jim. I'm here to stop the language as it sees fit.
How about that issue? I'm sure you've seen the Center for State Policy group at Tufts say that it is, well, you made it a face, but that saying that roughly 30 to 70% of the money that you say mandate has to go to transportation and education are likely to go there. So it's not like nothing, like he says, but just a piece.
It's constitutionally protected. I mean, we understand the role of the legislature, and we understand that that's why we put it in the Constitution, to make sure that that money is committed to those sources.
What does subject to appropriation mean, then?
That means that the legislature, within those areas, can say we need to focus on more money for higher ed, more money for early childhood care, more money to fix our broken bridges, more money to make sure that people aren't stuck in traffic as our economy starts to come back.
But why can't they, let's assume it's, for argument's sake, $750 million for education. Why can't they say, I'm going to put his $750 million in education, and I'm going to take $750 million out that I currently spend on education and spend it on something else that may be good, but not on that. They're not precluded from doing that, are they?
Right, but our campaign is being led by tens of thousands of teachers and other citizens who are interested in this. We're not just going to go away. We're sure that that money is going to be additive, that there's going to be more money, and we're going to make sure that the legislature upholds their commitment that they made when they put this on the ballot.
How about that? I mean, the Mass Teachers Association, a primary supporter here, and others, have a lot of power. I used to be a lobbyist, and I use the term loosely, on Beacon Hill. They have a lot of power up there. If tens of millions of dollars are spent between the two campaigns, the public knows what the issue is. It's not one of these arcane things on the ballot, and they vote yes. The legislature is going to have the goal to say, we're going to disregard what the intent of the voters was?
Well, intent we can discuss to that point. But let's also talk about why the union's doing this. To what advantage will they have? It's to raise their dues, to have more money come into the system towards that fund. They're funding it. There has to be a return relative to that. The legislature understands very well the needs that are across it. We have a budget surplus of billions of dollars, Jim, right now. They're giving back $3 billion this year. Some would say if this were active today, this money would just have to come back. We don't need it. So what are they going to do? Where are they going to go? How are they going to raise any more funds to that end? And there are lots of, as you know, as a lobbyist or former one, there are lots of other advocacy groups who'd love to pull at that money.
You know, they did
Healthcare,
divert cigarette
mental health.
tax money for economic development, like 15, or a ballot question, pardon me, a law earmarked money to cigarette-related diminution of smoking things. They diverted that money.
To repeat myself, and I'm not trying
Yeah.
to lecture.
Feel free.
This is a constitutional amendment. This isn't a ballot question. This isn't a regular law that gets passed in the legislature. This goes into the Constitution. It is as protected as you can get.
And I can agree with him.
Well,
But it's not going to increase any funding. It's shell game. It's
Well,
where
you
the money
don't know.
goes.
By the way, you don't.
It
when you
doesn't
say
have
it's
to.
not,
It doesn't have to.
It doesn't have to.
It
Do
does
you
not
agree
have
that
to.
it doesn't have to?
correct. But there's a political process here that doesn't
Understood.
end when this gets passed.
Understood. Let's
right?
move to the tax thing. Make the case for whatever, tax equity, tax fairness. Why is the tax policy part of this good policy, Steve?
Because the statistic I used before, the rich people in Massachusetts pay less than anybody else in taxes. That's part of the Constitution. We think it needs to be fixed. It will provide more money and make a more equitable society that improves that, so that where your kid goes to school and the quality education that they get doesn't depend on the zip code.
Can I ask a question?
No, before you do
Okay,
that,
sure.
I just want to play. Well, you ask the question, then I'll play something.
If we have a flat tax of 4%, the more money that you make, the more taxes that you pay. I don't understand
don't
anything that
have-
could be more fair.
Well,
than
you
that.
know the vast majority of states have progressive
I
income tax,
understand
as
that.
does the
Yeah,
federal
yeah.
government.
No, that's a different question of fairness relative to that.
First of all,
50% of the residents of Massachusetts don't pay income tax at all. So,
Well, they're
relative
not
to
going to be
where-
affected by this either,
No,
right?
understood.
What
Yeah.
was the point you're going to make?
We have a flat tax of 5%.
Yeah, I'm
The
sorry,
way
4%
this
would be the
bill, way
increase.
this bill would work is if you make if you make less than $1 million a year, it's not going to cost you a penny more. If you make more than $1 million, you're going to pay an extra 4% on your second million, and any million after that. Good for you. But the millionaires I talk to, and I don't know many, they're like, okay, that's fair.
I bet you do know many.
I know
In any
two.
case- So I want to play their first ad.
Carl, hold on.
I want to play the first ad from the Vote No coalition for you. Here it is.
Politicians are pushing a tax hike on the November ballot. That makes no sense.
Our state already has the biggest budget surplus in history.
But question one would nearly double the income tax rate.
On tens of thousands of small business owners.
Family farmers.
And homeowners.
Politicians aren't just taxing annual salaries.
It would also tax the sale of small businesses and homes in Massachusetts.
Vote no.
Vote no.
Vote no.
Shirley Leung in the Globe wrote about this, and I hadn't heard the term before, one-time millionaires. You know, a business owner sells a business, somebody sells their house, that kind of thing, and they're not regularly earning more than $1 million a year. You can't laugh at me until I'm done the question.
I'm laughing at the ad.
And then that one time, and you're apparently going to take away their whatever. So what do you say to that?
I argued with Shirley before she wrote that column, but this is a common scare tactic that lobbyists for the wealthiest people in the state often use. They say if you sell your house for $1 million, you're going to pay. They suggest that you're going to pay this tax. Not true. If you're going to have to sell your house for a lot more than $1 million to profit from the sale of that tax, what you bought the house for doesn't count. Any mortgage you have left doesn't count. If you're a married couple, you can write off $500,000 right off the top. 1%, actually less than 1%, 0.06% of the houses sold in 2021 earned more than $1 million, according to the Warren Group, the gold standard on real estate sales in Massachusetts.
In fact, you're smiling also, but it seems to me, I did a little independent research too, the number of people who would be affected as so-called one-time millionaires, there are some.
Yep.
It's an infinitesimally small number.
Not relative to those affected. 50%, 50.5.
How many are
actually,
affected overall?
every year?
How many affected overall? You said 50%.
50% of those affected.
How many will be affected?
only affected once?
How many
in their-
will be affected by the tax? You say 50% of what number? How many people?
So the
affected?
100% affected
I know, but
each
how
year.
many is 100%? What number of people are affected by this tax?
Housing sales?
No. Overall, by making over $1 million a year, and as a result, have to pay a tax on that overage.
That changes every year. So
Roughly, you don't know?
I don't want to estimate.
Okay, continue.
Jim, if we could throw a rock from where we're sitting right here, how many multi-million-dollar homes will we hit? And this is Brighton and Alston, Cambridge, right across the river. Housing prices that I look and I'm seeing are only going up. And it's not uncommon to have a home be worth all that money. And over 90% of residents of Massachusetts, their greatest equity that they have, their greatest asset that they have is the equity in their home. So when they go to retire, or they go to pass that on to their children, or they go to sell and downsize and have that be their nest egg that they have, they're going to pay 80% more taxes on the sale over $1 million.
That's just not true. I'll just use the metaphor that you use. You have to live in Dover or Martha's Vineyard for the majority of the houses to be worth $1 million. The idea, there was just a story in the Boston Business Journal.
Let us finish, and then you can...
There's just a story in the Boston Business Journal. I'm surprised you missed that. They list the names of the towns. It is not, and you have to earn a lot more than just $1 million to get in on sell your house for a lot more than $1 million to be impacted by this tax. And you know that. The people who are going to be impacted by the tax are already making $1 million a year.
They're not. 50% of them. It's the only time it'll happen to them in their life.
So is your position, just so I understand,
70% it only happens twice.
Is the No campaign's position that, again, the federal government, which have a higher tax rate, the higher your income goes, the majority of states, that they're all on the wrong track, that having a flat rate, where, as Steve said before, no matter how much you make, you pay the same percentage of your income, which obviously is a lot more painful to a low-income person than it is to a wealthy person. That whole concept...
Why is it more painful to a low-income person?
Because they have a lot more disposable income, obviously, than a poor person does. But let me just ask you, is the concept of progressive taxation anathema to the No campaign?
The people of Massachusetts, since 1962, have had that option 5 times, and they voted it down 2-1. 5 times.
It's actually not true. The last time they voted it down 71-29. I was leading the campaign. Go ahead.
What Dan is arguing is that their campaign is funded by most of their money comes from 5 billionaires in Massachusetts. And what he's saying, it is fair for them to pay the same amount as somebody who makes $25,000 or $35,000.
Not same amount, same percentage.
Same percentage.
Who funds your campaign?
Massachusetts Teachers Association, American Federation of Teachers, and we've got, hundreds of independent donors, including myself.
Dan, one of the things that I've read or heard from the opponents, I haven't heard from you, but other opponents, is if the tax rate is raised on those making $1 million a year, some significant number of people are going to leave the state. I have to say, when I used to do tax stuff for a living, what most wealthy people, particularly in business, told me is the most important thing to them is that we have a highly educated workforce, that we have roads on which we can get goods to market. And that it is in the language, the focus of the question. So you don't think that will outweigh an extra $40,000 if someone makes $2 million a year?
Yeah. The effect on uber wealthy is a red herring, Jim. That's not what this is about. This is about how it's going to affect small business owners. This is how it's going to affect farmers. This is how it's going to affect retirees and people. This is much more of a middle-class tax hike than it is for the uber wealthy. The uber wealthy already probably domicile in New Hampshire and Florida anyway. They already know how to tax
prepare. So who are we talking about?
We're talking about middle-class people. We're talking about people, this is only going to happen to them once in their life.
A person making more than $1 million a year is a middle-class person?
In Massachusetts right now, that's where it's about to be. When you sell your house, or you sell your small business, or you sell your farm because you've had it in your family.
How do you respond to that whole issue of movement? I mean, that is a concern to a lot of people who are objective on this issue.
People stay here because they came here for school, they grew up here, their family's here. A friend of mine used to say that if the Pilgrims had landed in California, Massachusetts would be a national park. This is a nice place to live. And, and people, that's why people stay. That threat that millionaires who are the least cost-effective people, cost-sensitive. They're not cost-sensitive group are going to move because they have to pay an extra 4% on the portion of their mortgage of their income.
Don't you answer that differently now than you would have before the pandemic? I mean, a lot of people who've got a lot of money, a lot of people don't have a lot of money, work remotely, and that's even easier for somebody who's got a lot of dough. That doesn't concern you?
And I don't think they moved out of state. Some people did. Some people moved to Vermont or New Hampshire for a little while. Friends of mine who did that. they didn't like the schools, they moved them back here. They moved their families back here.
You know, before you go, one of the things you've emphasized this is not a law change. A law change, I assume people know at home, if you change the law, I experienced this myself, the legislature can amend it in any way to make it better or worse, whatever better worse means. To amend, once you've amended the Constitution, if you succeed, the only way it can be changed, obviously, is if you go through the whole process again, et cetera, which is a multi-year process. Tell us why you think that's a good thing that this is in the Constitution.
Because, well, first of all, it addresses the concern that people have about the legislature being to fiddle with the money. We get that argument. But the 5% flat tax was established 100 years ago by amending the Constitution. We think it's an important part of the process of being in a democracy, and we think it's time to be updated.
Well, obviously, I should have been clear. You obviously have to amend the Constitution to have a higher rate.
Right.
I meant as a matter of public policy. You think it's good that it be locked in that fashion? Here's the change.
I regret to use the term lockbox because of the person who used it famously before.
That'd be almost President Gore you're talking about.
Exactly,
that's right.
Exactly right. He won that race, but that's
how about the
argument.
The other side here? Do you have a problem? Forget the merits of the question for a second.
Sure.
The issue of the language being in the Constitution, and for better or worse, depending on one's point of view, obviously one would have to go through a multi-year process to change it. Is that a good or a bad thing?
I think it's a bad thing.
Why is that?
And I think that 5 different times the people of Massachusetts have agreed with me, and they voted it down 2-1, that they thought it was a bad thing as well.
But we're not establishing a graduated income tax. We're simply saying one thing. If you earn more than $1 million, you're going to pay 5% more.
That's the definition of a graduated income tax.
No, it's not. It's a surtax, actually. That's the definition. But
listen,
you know, we can talk about that afterwards.
Last word.
I'm all for fairness, and I'm all for people paying what is right and to move our state forward, without question. This thing has had to manipulate itself to certain ways because it's taken so many years to get here. It was struck down by the Supreme Judicial Court because of its language once
Different
before.
question. Yeah.
Right, but it had to get to this point and taken it to where it is, to the point now that the scope of it, of who it affects, and this grand scheme of when it affects them, now we have the largest surplus in the history of Massachusetts, with people coming out of COVID, with small businesses struggling, looking to recover, and with tens of billions of dollars coming from the federal government for education and transportation. It's not the right time for it.
15 seconds.
We need a dedicated stream of revenue to fix our schools, fix our roads and transit. That will do this. $2 billion a year can only be spent on these areas. You can't plan on emergency federal money and budget surpluses.
Steve, thank you so much for your thoughts. Dan as well.
Thank you, Jim.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks.
Love that.